I'm going to start from the very biggest, broadest 30,000 foot question for you. Not what does a producer do, but why are you a producer?
It didn't occur to me that you could like actually make your living making movies until like the very end of high school. And I'd always wanted to be a writer, so I went from journalism to film. But when I got to school and started making, projects with everybody, I was the only girl, and I was also the only one who cared at all about being on schedule, on time, actually finishing projects. So my natural, used to be called bossiness, now I think we can call it a can-do attitude, just sort of came out, and I was producing everybody's stuff before I knew it, and I was like, I actually really love this. And being at film school in Seattle, I went to University of Washington, and I discovered, John Pearson's books, by Mike Slackers and Dykes, Christine Vachon's books, and of course her movies too, but also A Killer Life, and I just was like, that is exactly what I want to do. So, I fell in love, and it, satisfies my like obsession with office supplies.
How do you talk about the role of the producer to someone not in the business?
I say it's like throwing a really, really great dinner party. You want to get the right people together. You want to have the right food. You want to have the right music. You want to have the right ambiance. You want it to have just enough alcohol, not too much, and you don't want it to go on for too long.
Let's talk about misconceptions. What's a big misconception about producing?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions about producing is that it's all about the money. That's, a lot of producers are very good at money, and you definitely have to be good enough at money, but it's not your sole focus. At least certainly not for me. Like I prefer producing where I've been there from the idea, the very first script all the way through. So that's usually how I produce. Of course it involves the money, but it's definitely not all about the money.
If there's something you could change about the business, what would be something you'd change that you've seen sort of over and over?
I do think I would change just how difficult it is for certain types of people to access money, just how harder it is for women and people of color than it is for straight white men to access money. It's definitely a disparity. It's one of the reasons, frankly, I've stayed in Seattle and kept making weird, specific movies with my same friends over and over again because we can. And, when you stay under a certain level, you don't have to worry about people telling you no. But then at a certain point, if you want to, continue to grow, then you do have to sort of get out, and then you have to start dealing with systemic issues and barriers. So, if I could sort of take the magic wand and like change one thing, and frankly, it's happening slowly, but people are, we're all talking about it now, so it's definitely changing.
Sure, yeah, I'm glad we're talking about it. I think it's still slow to change because it's still a lot of
Step one,
white
talk about
men,
it.
which I am one, but yes, a lot of white men who still sort of distribute our movies and finance our movies. How do you go about, especially with your small group that you've made a lot of movies with, how do you celebrate small victories?
Usually karaoke. It's interesting. I think it is funny because I almost feel like you never really do fully celebrate. Like even when you're at your world premiere, it's like you do have the premiere party, but the producers are always working still. Like you're still working at the premiere party. Usually the directors are also still like you're still working. You're very rarely do you be like, oh, here's this, here's that. But I do think that taking time to sort of acknowledge and sort of be grateful for the milestones along the way, and working with people like Megan Griffith and Lynn Shelton, they're also just naturally sweet, wonderful, people that are full of a lot of gratitude. So, and the three of us also do really enjoy karaoke, so that does actually happen a lot.
Makes me happy.
Yeah. Kickoff party, rap party. Yeah, usually.
What are the advantages of continuing to work with some of the same people?
Well, it's great to work, and not only do I work with Megan and Lynn frequently, but we tend to work with a lot of the same crew again and again, regardless of who's directing, frankly. And it's really nice when you find people who you collaborate well with and you can develop a shorthand. If you're starting from scratch with somebody, you're like, ooh, I don't know, I don't have to wonder, like, how does Megan like to receive feedback, or what would be the best way to communicate something to Lynn? Like, I know them both very well, and so it's very easy to talk to them about things that are both positive and things that are difficult. So that's a real bonus. And then, of course, you're always trying to save time on set, and so if you have a shorthand with people, including the crew. If everyone's just already on the same page, it makes it that much easier.
What's something you wish someone had told you before you got to this point in your career?
Just sort of people talking more about the failures. You know, we do, especially in independent film, we have such a obviously we're storytellers, so there's this very specific narrative about independent film. And like, this is how it happens, and here's how the overnight success is, and then like, and here's what defines that sort of success, and here's what those successful filmmakers look like. When there's really this very wide range of like how filmmaking careers are sort of patched together, and like what are the different options, and just how frequently you fail, even while you're still a success. So like having those failures, having those projects that don't actually come together, having being really close to shooting a film and having the lead actor back out and then never actually making that movie, like that still happens to people who've made Sundance films before and after. And it's just, I feel like that's just something we don't really talk about very often.
I agree. Yeah, there's also this like glamorousness of the narrative of suffering. Like you're supposed to like kill yourself to fucking do this. And,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, we touched on that we touched on that outside as well, sort of that like sustainability, and not necessarily financially, but from like a bandwidth and sort of like healthy lifestyle sort of thing. Talk about that a little bit, about sort of gauging your own internal like bandwidth and health.
You know, I think too, for me personally, but I think also for a lot of producers, it's like we get into this because we're good at making things happen, and we really like, making people's dreams come true. Their dreams become our dreams. And so for me, it was just really hard for a while to say no to anything that I wanted to do. Because my sort of guiding principle about like, why would I do a film or not is like, is this a film that I really, really want to see exist in the world? And if so, yes, like I'm on. And now it has to be like, is this something I really, really want to see in the world? And do I have the bandwidth for it? Because, if you overload yourself, you disappoint everybody, including yourself, right? So yeah, just sort of, and it also means, because what you can take on when you're just developing things is not the same as what you can take on if you're about to go into production on something. That's a real obvious and easy gauge, but you just sort of have to be paying attention to, if this project is this far along and this project is this far along, am I going to be able to, will I realistically be able to do both? And or is there another producer involved that I can tag team with? And do they have a film also about to go into production, right? It was really amazing to have both Outside In and SADIE here at South by Southwest last year. They played at the exact same time, which is just a really wonderful but also awful problem to have. Thankfully, Outside In had already had its world premiere at Toronto, so I chose SADIE, but still awkward. But those films also, obviously they're in the festival circuit at the same time, they also shot back to back. And SADIE I had been the sole, capital P producer on for years before we made it. But we were like, we're definitely gonna be able to go into production, as Outside In was just going into production. So I got a really great, amazing, producing partner, Janessa West, who, helped me actually get it into production, because I could not be pre-prep on SADIE while I was in production on Outside In. It was just absolute back to back. So yeah, just finding the right people to work with and knowing when you can say like, this is actually my limit. That's really important.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone, or even a group of people who are somewhere else, they're not in Austin or they're not in Seattle, and they want to sort of create and curate that sort of environment?
I think if you're trying to like really bring a community together that's not in, LA, New York, Atlanta, an already established hub, I think it's key to have people who are basically have the same vision, like get on the same page, even if, hopefully you're making diverse work, but if people have the right blend of like, we're all trying to get to a certain place together. Yeah. That's really helpful. I mean, we were really lucky in Seattle because there just happened to be enough of us who had the same sort of goals for what we wanted to be doing, and we wanted to be making interesting films. We wanted to be telling, character-based stories, and we didn't want to leave Seattle. So we banded together and we did that. You also have to make sure that you're not just taking care of the people who are currently succeeding, but you have to make sure that you're bringing up the people underneath you. And so it was interesting for us, where there was this, on one hand, you don't want to have a ton of unpaid interns, AKA, people who you're taking advantage of and working for free. On the other hand, you want to be giving people on-set experience so they can actually break into the business. So that's always been an interesting sort of give and take in our industry in general. But because, our state incentive office really does like focus on things like that, we had to sort of think about like, how do we actually bring in people? Are we only allowed to bring in matriculated students, and then we're cutting off people who aren't getting, a four-year college degree, and that seems pretty, so taking those weird specific issues that come up and just talking with folks and sort of figuring out how can we find a solution that's going to be like more inclusive, but also, follows the letter of the law. That's what us nerdy producers like to do, right?
Yeah. I want to talk specifically about SADIE, and it has its world premiere at South by Southwest, and you guys self-distribute the movie. I want to work backwards from there, though. When did you and Meg and team sort of start to plan for that self-distribution?
Interesting enough, so we talked about potentially doing this sort of like creative distribution with SADIE. We talked about it as a possibility even before we premiered. We knew that SADIE was a difficult film. SADIE is the story of a 13-year-old girl who grows up with her mother in a trailer park while her dad has been serving repeated tours of duty overseas in the military. Before we premiered at South by, we'd already seen the Columbus case study. So we'd already seen, what those guys had done and how they had been able to do that with Columbus. So, and Megan and I have been through the ringer a few times with distribution of our independent films, our comedies and our dramas, and we had the D-word drama, which of course is what no indie distributor wants to do anymore. So we knew it would be an uphill battle. Having a drama that was for adults starring a kid, it took us forever to finance it. We knew it would be hard to distribute it. So we were already, and to even back up, we had, in addition to our production budget, we'd actually raised a specific amount of money that was going to be just for P&A, to sort of supplement whatever, we still call it P&A, but essentially to supplement the marketing budget, which we had hoped would be, in accordance with our distributor. But we just knew, having done the indie distribution route a few times, seeing the various levels of success, we knew we wouldn't be getting the most amazing deal for SADIE, and we knew that we would have to, in order to have actual power at that table at the distribution, we needed to have some finances to back it up. So we already had that bit of money, and then we had amazing sales reps, but at the end of the day, when we did have some offers for SADIE, but they were very lackluster, and we would have been able to take some money and immediately give it back to the investor and be like, okay, now we're just going to cross our fingers and hope that we can get to meaningfully consult on this. But yeah, it just wasn't what we wanted to do. And one of the things that we want to do with SADIE in particular is we want to have a lot of academic screenings, and both the distributors we were talking to, both of them were like, yeah, we don't want to do that. And we were like, it was so, I have to say, empowering to like, for once, be like completely willing to walk away. It felt pretty good to be like, yeah, we don't want to do that. Because, as an independent filmmaker, you're constantly being asked to like, take this or not. And we were like, yeah, we actually feel pretty good about not. Of course, by that point, we'd already had a conversation with our EP. We already talked about this being a possibility, and we knew that, at that point, the Amazon Film Festival Stars program still existed. But it was so great because it is hard, unless you're going like straight to a Netflix, straight to an Amazon in terms of, one of those deals. It is hard to get any sort of meaningful amount of money for streaming only rights and to be able to do much else. So Amazon Film Festival Stars program was a really great opportunity for us to be like, okay, well, we know with what Columbus has done, like we know that there's a path to just booking these theaters ourselves, and we can do the academic screenings, and then we have our streaming route, and we have this, we already have some money, we can take this other money, we can put this into the theatrical. And it was very, very challenging in terms of the amount of time it took. It was like learning how to produce a movie all over again, except for it was learning how to produce a distribution. And of course, even though we'd been around it several times, both Megan and I, we've never had to book theaters. There were certain things about just the inner workings of it that we just did not know, frankly, how it worked, which was fascinating because it was definitely not our first rodeo. But we didn't have to actually book things ourselves. But even in just hiring the booker and having to be a part of those negotiations with this theater chain versus that theater chain, are we, Regal's interested, but can we wait until this date because we're not going to know how many theaters until just like a week before, and is it worth it? And just all of these things that came up that we just never had to deal with before.
What does the produced by credit mean to you, and how does somebody earn that?
I guess when I see a produced by credit, when I see it, I hope what it means, right? Because there is so much scope creeping up. When I see and when I see the PGA, right, when you know the PGA is there, or when you see just a few people, 1 or 2 people on there, to me that means like that person was there from the very beginning to the very end. You know, being a true partner in the actual making of the film, being, you know, because I think most people who don't know the film industry just sort of assume that the director gets the best picture Oscar. I did. It never occurred to me like, oh, there's a best director, but then there's a best picture, but I'm sure that goes to the director too. You know, like as a kid, you just don't even think about that. So of course, like I understand why everybody and their brother wanted to get a produced by credit, because who wouldn't want to be up there on stage grabbing that pretty little Oscar? But when it's an actual produced by credit, yeah, to me that means someone's been there from the very beginning to the very end, or at least when they did join, even if it wasn't, you know, before a script was started, but was a real driving force in that film actually getting made. And I feel like just as if a film is directed by another director, it would be a very different film. I feel like if you have a good producer, if that film had been produced by another producer, it'd be a very different film. The resources for that director, the environment for that director, and the actors and the crew would not be the same. So yeah, I think it's, I don't know. That's what I think.